Okay, welcome everybody. As usual, give everybody a little time to get in the room for our webinar here with Jason Juhl. Um, Jason, how are
I'm
things?
doing fantastic. How about you, Justin?
Awesome.
Got some
Great.
time with your wife on Friday. You are rested and rejuvenated. Just a new
Well, as rested and rejuvenated as I can be, yes.
right. Or fair. Touche.
But I shouldn't
Were you
complain.
sore? Were you sore this weekend after skiing?
What's that?
Were you sore this weekend?
No, we didn't ski real hard. No, I was fine. Yeah.
You are young. That speaks to
At
youth.
heart, at heart, for sure.
Yeah.
So where's everybody calling in from? Maybe join in the you can put that in the chat. Um, Always curious to see where everybody. Austin, still have not had a chance to really check out Austin. I hear great things.
Amen. Me too.
Oh man, all over the place.
All over the country. No one from Iowa. At least not yet.
Iowa yet. Please do not. Florida, nice. Anybody still have a bracket that's together? I guess anybody who just went with the top seeds. Yes, all four.
Great mix of geography today.
Yeah, I'll say. Awesome. All right, still got a bunch of people coming in. But don't want to delay too long. So we got a great one today. So for those of you who don't know Jason Juhl, we could probably do a little bit of an intro. I'll let him do that. But today is well, the title is Elevate Your Retirement Planning, a modern client-centric approach. And really, we wanted to have this time with Jason because he has been such a great resource for advisors using Income Lab. In the past, we did I think 4 or 5 session masterclass last year.
Six.
6 session. Oh, wow. I mean, it was amazing. So please check that out if you want to dive deep into Income Lab, into talking with clients, into presenting plans, building plans, all of that. So today it'll be a little bit more of a discussion with Jason. We'll touch on some of that material um, again, but it's really about kind of how Jason runs his practice when it comes to using Income Lab, where it touches on clients, prospects, communication, and so on. So, but before we get into that, Jason, I'd love it if you kind of gave the couple hundred folks here a little feel for your background and kind of what you're up to these days, other than being a new father again.
Yes. Husband,
On that.
father, that certainly comes first, and then the profession. Yeah. So partner wealth advisor Carson Wealth out of West Des Moines. We've helped grow a practice from 250 million to just shy of 700 million in the last about 4.5 years. So I've had some tremendous success. Did have a merger and acquisition along the way. So my partner here make reference to me and an Iowa representative on the chat today. So glad she's tuned in. And ultimately, we help clients that are kind of 5 years pre-retirement through end of life. You know, we've got these accumulators growing their wealth, saving and investing, building up this nest egg. And ultimately, we help with the distribution phase where we get to help clients live their wealth. And that's where Income Lab comes in. And that's why I've really enjoyed the software. But it's not all roses. Takes a little bit of time and some patience, but we'll get into all that.
All right. So maybe let's start with kind of for you. I mean, you started using Income Lab years ago now, but sort of what initially made you look into it and then adopt it fully in your practice?
Historically, the software I had seen in the past was all accumulation oriented. We can throw out the names. Everyone knows the names of those popular accumulation software, which are ultimately going to provide a probability success. And so ultimately, that's great when we're looking to grow our wealth and build our wealth. The challenge was when we think about retirement, we think about distributions. How do we pull money out of our investment accounts in the most tax efficient fashion so we keep more money in our pocket and make sure we're not tipping Uncle Sam? How do we give our clients great confidence to know that this nest egg that they've built up can last them a lifetime? But not in the sense of a percentage or a score, a probability of success, but to show them if you have X amount of dollars in your portfolio, here's the income it supports. Here's the lifestyle you could lead. Here's the lifestyle you could live. And ultimately, here's the lifestyle you deserve, whether you choose to pursue that spending capacity or not. And then at what point, if your portfolio grows or falls, would we need to or be eligible to make an income adjustment? And that's what I had lacked in the past. And ultimately, that's why we dove into these various decumulation software out there and landed on Income Lab.
So just to give people a feel for what you're talking about, and I think this really, we've talked about it in lots of ways, and I'd encourage people to check out the first episode of that masterclass where we really dive into kind of what's the goal of retirement, and what's the goal of retirement advice, and talking about sort of helping people not focus on sort of what do I want to say? Kind of bland statistics or hard to understand statistics, but more like, how can I best live my life? And so that's, what you're talking about there is probability of success, which in that we could dive deep into why that's a problem for people in retirement. And actually, maybe I'll ask you a little bit about that, versus how much can I spend, which is what you're seeing here, and then guardrails. And we'll get into guardrails, but actually, maybe let's talk about a little bit of why you found accumulation software that focuses on probability of success to be kind of a rough fit for what you were trying to do with clients. And I know you have some examples of clients and to kind of bring this home.
I would say a few things. Number one, I think probability of success provides us with a target of 100%. So like, for example, we wake up in the morning, we give 100% effort. When we were in school, we were striving to get A's and score 100% on our scorecards. And so throughout our entire lives, we've been taught to strive for 100%. And I think the challenge with probability success is clients strive to have a financial planning score, a probability success of 100%. And ultimately, if we have 100% probability success in any of those financial planning softwares, it is 100% guaranteed you're underspending your resources. And you are going to leave an excessive nest egg. Now, if that's the goal, fantastic. But 99-ish% of our clients say you get what you get and you don't grow a fit. That legacy goal is not a goal in the sense of leaving behind larger balances. The clients we work with, and what I spend 95% of my day doing, is helping clients understand, here are the resources you've saved and you've invested. Here's the balances in your investment accounts. Here's then the income those investments support. And in turn, here's the lifestyle and the income you could potentially utilize to live out your grandest dreams. And we want to make sure that our clients live without regret. That if they had a bucket list item to go to Europe or take that family vacation to Florida and rent the beach house and bring the children and the grandchildren and really have this grand time and make an incredible memory, that they pursue that goal. If they want to have a second home, that they pursue that goal. Whatever the goal may be, it could be giving, could be gifting. It might be giving with a warm heart, or with a warm hand and a beating heart, to where they want to gift their children when their children are younger, when their children are raising their grandchildren, where it's really going to leave a lasting mark because they want to be able to purchase their first home. And they want to see their children reap the benefit of that purchase. And so it's a long-winded way to say that we want to help clients truly live the balances in their accounts. And probability of success oftentimes leads to underspending. And it can lead to them not pursuing their lifelong dreams and goals, and ultimately can lead to regret.
Yeah. I like to say no one's ever walked into a financial advisor and out of the blue said, well, what I really want from you is my probability of success. Maybe they learned that somewhere, but somebody, a naive retiree or planning client is not asking for that. They're asking, hey, how can I live the best life I can? How can I reach my goals? And so on. So that makes sense. We've had a few questions in the Q&A. And by the way, please do feel free to put questions in the Q&A. And actually the Q&A, not the chat. I'll try to look at the chat, but it's really hard. That just gets super full. And then if you see any questions that you want to see answered, go ahead and upvote them, the little thumbs up. So we have had a few people ask, are you using any accumulation software? Do you have clients who are more in the accumulation phase?
So we still have some accumulation software because we haven't transitioned every single client to Income Lab. We're still in that process. We're actually going to get to that a little later in the session because it is a load to lift, right? To build out these plans, so on and so forth. So yeah, we do still use accumulation software, but that's not the goal long term, because ultimately that accumulation software has just psychologically been kind of impeding to our clients. I'll give you a case in point. So you think back to 2022, we had 9% inflation, markets fell, S&P was down about 24% during that period of time. And we had some clients whose scores declined during that period, as many of you may have had clients whose scores declined. And I have one client in particular, and he was living his best life. We were sending him a decent sized distribution, certainly above that 4% distribution rule. And he was in the early stages of retirement. And so those are the go-go years. And I just saw that chimed in here via the chat. And that's the thing about retirement. Retirement's very dynamic in nature. Retirement isn't this linear, you need the exact same amount of income for the remainder of life. We have this retirement smile, where we spend more money up front pursuing some of our lifelong goals. Maybe some of those goals we had sacrificed and not pursued in our working years. You could call that the go-go years. And then maybe 10, 15 years down the road, maybe we reach the age of 80, we're not as healthy, we're not as cognitively inclined, and maybe just don't have desire to travel as much or spend as much money on certain hobbies and items. And so therefore, that'll be the slow-go years, and then the tail end where we might have a health event, and that be the no-go years. And so ultimately, this particular client was in the retirement smile early on in the go-go series, and he was spending time with friends, family, traveling out to the West Coast to spend time with his grandkids, built a pool so he could make incredible memories in his backyard. And as you can imagine, it put some stress on his plan. And ultimately, he was scoring in the 90s prior to probability success in the 90s prior to 2022. And we run into this rampant inflation. His score declines to 70% probability success. As you can imagine, that was alarming to him. Not so much us as practitioners, because we understand that the markets are going to go up, the market's going to go down, and ultimately that the market would inevitably recover, and so would his plan. But it was jarring to him. And it was psychologically challenging. And ultimately, it did result in him wanting to tighten up his purse strings substantially. And so ultimately introduce Income Lab, where we're able to look at guardrails and spending capacity. The guardrails allow us to avoid that psychological fear and anxiety of our scores fluctuation and how that might impact our income, how much income we would need to reduce our monthly or annual distribution, and the amount of income we're eligible for. So like the plan Justin's flashed before us, we've got a portfolio balance of $2.75 million with an income level of $18,600 a month. That is a gross figure, so that's before taxes. And you'll notice here that if this portfolio were to fall, it would need to fall by 25%, by 684,000 before this client would need to take a pay cut or be recommended to take a pay cut. And that is very comforting to clients in my experience. And ultimately, through Income Lab, it's helped alleviate that concern that my clients had when we scored their plans with probability of success. Guardrails, an anticipated income level, and how much a client's portfolio could grow or fall before they would be eligible to make an income adjustment up or down based on that portfolio balance. So kind of setting the expectation removes a lot of anxiety, specifically around the political tone of the current administration. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, I have been getting calls kind of on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And going back to the, clients they don't want a probability of success. That's not initially what they're asking for. They may have learned to ask for it, but really as a guide, as an advisor, you're telling clients how to track their life, how to track, the answer to the how am I doing question. And so if you say, well, no, the way to do it is to use these guardrails, right? Hey, here's what we're spending. We'll keep doing that until there's a reason to make an adjustment. When would that be? Let's set the expectations. Okay, if tomorrow you woke up and you had 2 million instead of, 2.75, we would make a pay cut. How much? Here's how much. And then over time, they're tracking that. So you're actually, these aren't just plans, they're actually things that you track over time. And so you would be able to kind of live that experience with your clients. For example, let's say for your 2022 example here, let's say if they'd retired a long time ago, in this case, if they retired back in the global financial crisis, this is what would have happened. So that $2 million would have come down to 1.6, let's call it, but they would have been able to see, okay, yeah, but my guardrail was 1.3. I haven't been there. I'm not there yet. So they know, what am I going to do? When do I need to make an adjustment? And I know I've heard a lot of these stories from you, Jason, also from other advisors, that especially during the 2022, inflation and market trouble, that was very comforting to clients, and it made them not have to sort of overreact or wonder, hey, what's going to happen when the next shoe drops? Am I going to have to really, cut my spending in half? You actually have a plan for adjustment, a plan for change, and just knowing, like having expectations. I think we all know that, anybody who has kids knows that. You gotta set expectations. Is I think a big part toward kind of figuring out that client psychology side of it.
Very much. And that's the formula we talk about often in client meetings is happiness equals reality minus expectations. Hmm. The closer our expectation is to reality, the happier we will be.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what Guardrails does, is it sets an expectation in general of how much income an individual is eligible for based on their portfolio balance. And if the portfolio were to grow or were to fall, how would that then impact their income? Because at the end of the day, from an accumulation perspective, we're saving and investing, clients are saving and investing to grow this nest egg for them to then be able to live on in retirement. And the biggest fear in retirement for retirees is their paycheck has gone away. And now, how do I turn my portfolio into income? How do I make sure my portfolio is sustainable through all market cycles and lasts me a lifetime? But at the end of the day, how do I replace my paycheck? And how do I have confidence to know that I'm going to have enough income on a monthly or an annual basis to do what I want to do when I want to do it? And that's really valuable from a guardrail perspective, but also spending capacity. What I've found is most clients actually, based on their portfolio balances, they're oftentimes eligible to spend more than they are currently spending.
Right. So let's answer that question. We've had a few of these, kind of where are the numbers coming from? Where's the how much can I spend answer coming from? Where are the guardrails coming from? And we've covered these in some other webinars as well, but it's a great question. What we're doing here is saying, to Jason's point about we don't want people to spend at a level where they're going to regret things later. But of course, we also don't want them to spend above their means, be spending too hot, right? As you just said, Jason, often it's actually the first problem is the problem you encounter where people are actually spending well below their means. So the question is, given that this family in this example has a couple of Social Securities, so that's the the purple and the light blue. They got a pension. They've got some rental income, and they have some lumpy spending goals. So people were talking about the go-go years and so on. So we have the retirement smile. We're still paying off a mortgage. We're doing some extra vacations, I think, in this case. Yep, the pink is some extra vacations. Given that those are the goals, how much can we spend? So what Income Lab does is just says, all right, here's all the ways, that we think the world could go for you. Could be good, could be bad, high inflation, high returns, low returns. Let's find for you a spending level. In this case, this is a very moderate setting where we have a 20% risk we're overspending and an 80% risk we're underspending. So all of this stuff is based on those two risks, the risk of overspending and the risk of underspending. Nobody wants to overspend, right? That's the one people worry about. But the fact is, often underspending is the more likely risk, at least in Jason's practice. And I definitely have seen this with a lot of advisors. And so we want to balance that. And that's what this is. And that's just math, right? We're just saying, given all your assumptions, given the structure of the plan, that's the balance of risks that we want. As Jason said, the risk of underspending, that's actually, I would not encourage you to use this terminology, but the risk of underspending is the probability of success. So probability of success is risk of underspending. So 100% probability of success, as Jason said, 100% probability of underspending. Where do the guardrails come from? Well, if this is kind of that balance of overspending and underspending, the upper guardrail is the point where our chance of underspending is too high. Right? That's the point where you say, hey, you're going to start regretting. And then the lower guardrail is where your chance of overspending is too high. And so these are all, you can set them yourselves in the software, but the defaults are, very, very straightforward. We would wait until we are very sure that you're overspending to recommend it, to have the plan adjust. And we're going to also do the same if you're underspending. It's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, time to live a little. So I know, John, you had some questions on that on the Q&A, and we can also send you more. We've actually touched this on several webinars. Also, let me make sure. Oh, let me ask this, Jason, before we move on to kind of how you implemented this in your practice. Are you using this for people who are not yet retired? Like, when do you? I know your practice. You described it. It's people near retirement anyway. But do you use it a bit before they're retired?
Yeah, I mean, before they actually pull the trigger, just to give them a sense of the software and kind of the expectation. As early as 3 years pre-retirement, just so they can start to get a feel for the software and the guardrails, the spending capacity as a result. Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right. So, and thank you. There's a bunch of chatter on the Q&A. Good answer there, Spencer. Just for those of you who don't see it, some of you may have done the math in your head and said, wait a second, 18.6 a month, 2.75 million. What's going on there? The paycheck is your total paycheck. It's a mix of everything. And so there's no rules of thumb here. We're not just taking it and multiplying it by 4%. If that were how you do retirement planning, nobody needs an advisor. And that's not the way that you do retirement planning. So it's much more complex than that. There's a lot of other sources of resources here for spending, not to mention that the spending is not flat. So great answer. Thank you, Spencer. Okay, so let's go into, you've alluded to it a few times. how do you, I mean, this is actually beyond Income Lab, just when you're thinking about tech stack and systems and so on, how do you think about making changes, the inevitable costs and training and so on? There's no such thing as like a, you know, uh, frictionless change, right? There's going to be some
Mhm.
some costs. How did you make the Income Lab switch? How are you? It sounds like you're continuing to do so. And how have you found that?
So I think there's a number of elements to weigh. First element variable is clients in general. What software are you currently using? Was I using versus what software we think would be more effective based on the distribution nature of our retired clients. But then also, what's the impact to our practice and the workload on our operations staff? I think a lot of us, CEOs or visionaries, we come up with a lot of grand ideas. And I remember early in my career, I would come back to the office after a conference or something, and I would have, half a dozen or a dozen grand ideas, and I would spring them on the operations staff, and you just see their head explode. And so I've started to dial that back and only bring an idea or two, maybe three. I think realistically, if you're going to implement and act on various visions, ideas, software changes, you can maybe act on 3 to 5 a year. And so just being really selective about what changes I made in the practice, how I made those changes. The software was very valuable to our clients from a psychological standpoint, though, specific to retirement. Whereas with the probability of success, we found clients really striving for 100% probability success and end up, as a result, underspending their resources. And this guardrail system allowed us to alleviate that fact and really help our clients live their lives. So that's what I would say is think about your staff, think about your capacity. And that was the biggest fear I had, was how to actually integrate this into the practice. The workload that would be required, there's work to be done. The way we go about our client meetings is we have a 6-month cadence. So we'll meet with our clients semi-annually. We'll have a 6-month cadence. We call those wealth plans or strategy sessions. And ultimately, as we approach their upcoming wealth plan, 4 weeks in advance, 3 weeks in advance, we will build out the plan in advance of that session. So then we've got plenty of time to be prepared, get all the integrations built in, get all the plan information built in. That way we can be geared up and prepared to present to that client and basically demonstrate the new software and tools that we have at our fingertips.
So in your case, you weren't saying, all right, drop everything. We're not going to do anything in our practice except work on, converting whatever plans you had before to Income Lab plans. You do them as they come along, and that kind of just, it's like a drip, drip, drip of work there.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of academics out there that might say do a surge and build all these plans, and all of you in the audience and myself included know that there's a difference between academia and reality and actually putting different theories and concepts to practice. So in this instance, we would just build them as the client meetings hit our calendars.
Right. Yeah, and I'll tease it here. Income Lab has some pretty cool new features coming out, since we know that transition process is, it is a big deal. And like you said, it's probably the elephant in the room whenever somebody thinks about changing software or adding software. So we got some pretty cool new features to help speed that up. So anyway, that's just a tease. We're not going to announce anything today.
Love it. The one thing I would add there is change is always difficult. I don't like change. It's challenging. What I found though is once I started to build my first plan, it felt like it took, an exorbitant amount of time. It didn't. It was just I was uncomfortable, I had anxiety, and I was unfamiliar. And then once you've built half a dozen plans, your speed picks up substantially. You become much more familiar with the process. You almost get into an autopilot type of a mode where you're able to build these plans and really not have to think a whole lot. Once you get to your 10th, 11th, 12th plan, it's kind of like autopilot. And so it does get much more efficient as you get more familiar with the planning software.
And there's a bunch of ways to create these plans. One, if you have certain integrations in Income Lab, you can do what's called a household import, where we'll pull all the information we can find from that integration and build a plan using it, and then you elaborate on that plan. You can build it, using kind of a really quick, almost like Excel spreadsheet, boom, 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 put stuff in, or you can go a little more methodically through it. So lots of options there. Let's see, maybe we'll see if we can hit a couple of these questions before we get on to continue talking about the transition and how that goes. I know a couple things, because I know I've shown a few things in the software, and people there's a bunch of questions like, what's that? What's that? So a quick one, somebody noticed this slider at the bottom here. This is because what you're doing is you're taking all the resources, right? For these folks, a couple of Social Securities, pension, rental property, portfolio, all that, plus their life expectancy, which somebody asked about that. There's a full, actuarial model built in here to figure out, hey, how are we kind of long-lived or short-lived? All that stuff, right? Retirement smile, spending more on long-term care, all that stuff built in. There's not one answer to how much you can spend. You could be, more conservative, spend a little less. It sounds like often in your case, Jason, your clients, may be in a position where that's fine. That's still plenty for them. And if you do that, your lower guardrail's farther away. You want to spend more, that's fine too. Your lower guardrail will just be closer. So that's what that is. Look how people were asking about that. The other question people had was, okay, this is great. You're seeing the portfolio withdrawals. This is total portfolio withdrawals, kind of layered on top of the other income sources. Can I see where the actual withdrawals are coming from? This is something called Life Hub, which is this map of that same plan, and it shows down to the account level. This is not a particularly complex plan, so I think it's just taken from all the accounts at the same time. But if you had Roth conversions, or you were phasing things in, taxable, tax-deferred, tax-free, things like that, you would see all that here down to the account level where the different withdrawals are coming from. So that hits a couple of those questions. What about with clients, Jason? So you just talked about kind of with your team and with yourself, what a transition looks like, being careful about, not bringing too many ideas at once. What about clients? Is that a concern? Was that a concern to you to change how you talk with them?
It was. I was apprehensive, suspicious how clients would react as I introduced Income Lab. The reality is we work our entire lives to save and invest and ultimately climb up the mountain. And at the top of the mountain is retirement. We get to retirement, we throw our hands in the air, and we're participating in a completely new sport. It's like comparing football and basketball. Accumulation is football and retirement is basketball. Well, the number of athletes on each team is completely different. The styles of the game are completely different. The ball you use is completely different. The scoring is completely different. That's very similar to comparing accumulation to distribution. And so if it's a completely different sport, shouldn't we be measuring our success and scoring in a completely different fashion? And that's really the easiest way to explain it. And so now that we're in a unique chapter of life, we need to change our retirement planning software to an appropriate software. And that is Income Lab. That is Guardrails. That is spending capacity. That is tax smart distributions.
Did you have anyone say, wait, what happened to probability of success? Anything like that?
I've not had anyone say what happened to probability of success. What I've seen, though, is I have seen the weight get lifted off their shoulders many times, because now they've got a direct correlation with the balances in their accounts that they've worked so hard and diligently to save and to invest, coordinated with an income level that they're eligible for. Whereas probability of success did not provide them with that clear-cut data. So I have not had one person say, what happened to probability of success? I just explain it as it's really a new book in the series, a new chapter in the book, a new book in the series. And so therefore, we need a different software in order to be able to score your retirement accordingly.
Right. We've had some more questions on what I just went over of the, where are these withdrawals coming from, and especially related to taxes. I know, Jason, as big of a fan as you are of what can I spend, guardrails, living the best life you can, not regretting. I know taxes are actually maybe you're bigger you're a bigger fan of tax smart planning. So we may as well touch on that, and maybe I'll show Tax Lab here if you want to kind of walk us through how you do tax planning for retirees.
So Tax Lab is how Income Lab came to be at Carson Wealth at our firm. This was the key driver of why we adopted Income Lab was Tax Lab. What we found, though, is clients, although they were interested in the Tax Lab piece, they were more interested in the retirement GPS and the guardrails. But this, as a practitioner, is why we adopted Income Lab. And it's ultimately the idea that there are a number of distribution strategies that we could pursue. There's a number of financial planning and tax planning techniques we could utilize, whether that's qualified charitable distributions, whether that's Roth conversions, what size of Roth conversion should we execute? What's going to be the impact to those IRMA brackets? What's going to be the length of a Roth conversion? And how do we optimize all these moving components to have the optimal formula? And that is Tax Lab.
Yeah, so just so people can know what they're looking at here. So this is the same plan we're just looking at, but now it's run through 20 different ways you could source the income, whether it's phased, taxable, tax-deferred, tax-free, whether you're doing Roth conversions. As Jason just said, you can also build into the plan more complex things like qualified charitable distributions. It'll track, carry forward deductions, all that stuff. So if you've got clients who are doing, charity and deductions, this is all included here. And then it's just showing you here, those 20 different ways with a heat map, and you're seeing in the green, okay, it looks like this is kind of the area where we're starting to see some good value. Jason, I think it was you who said you actually sometimes find
this is a secret sauce. Secret sauce right here, Justin. Yeah, this isn't a teaser. This is the real deal. So this particular, so when we are having conversation with clients, taxes by far are a client's largest cost over the course of their life. You think about how much in taxes each of you have paid over the course of your earning years and will continue to pay in your retirement years. Taxes are a significant cost. And so when we think about taxes and we think about retirement, the beauty of retirement is if you have pre-tax accounts, Roth accounts, and taxable accounts, you've got some incredible tax diversification. And we can be selective about what accounts we withdraw from in what order, and really make sure we're not unnecessarily tipping the government. And so that's where we'll flash to this screen here and ultimately show the conventional distribution strategy that a lot of advisors use: taxable distributions first, tax deferred, followed by tax free, versus if we were to execute some Roth conversions. Fill up the 24% bracket, converting from traditional to Roth, generating income, additional income needs from the taxable account. And ultimately, how much is a client tipping the government by not executing Roth conversions? So if you scroll down just a little bit, Justin, and yeah, if you just go over to the total taxes piece, hover over total taxes, thank you. So if we take the conventional approach, the client's going to pay approximately $1.33 million in taxes over the remainder of their life. Whereas if we use a tax smart, tax sensitive distribution strategy, you'll see here the taxes are less. And what this $609,000 figure represents is a tipping of the government by choosing not to pursue Roth conversions and tax smart distribution strategies. And I'll ask the client if that's by design or how that decision came to be. And oftentimes they don't really have an answer and aren't sure. And so what I through research and what I've learned is loss aversion. If we are to tell a client that we can save them $609,000 in taxes, that savings, although is significant, clients are more likely to act on saving themselves from losses. It's called loss aversion, versus actually just saving money. They're more fearful of loss.
Yeah. Yeah. So framing this as a cost, which you can do just by, flipping it, versus hey, we could do this, which improves your life. You say, well, if you don't do anything, this is the cost of doing it. Same exact data, just flipped around. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. For those of you who are, interested in kind of where these, what these other parts of the software are doing, just share with you, because we did have a couple questions on kind of where the taxes are, how you're calculating taxes, and so on. And that is all in here. There were some questions on pre-retirement as well. So this is all usable for people who are not yet retired, right? So you can say, hey, we'll try, what if I did some Roth conversions now before I retire? What if I, same with the Life Hub. That's all usable. I mean, that's actually quite nice to have, even if you're 20 years from retirement, to have those, the vision of kind of what are the different parts of your financial life and how they fit together. But you can see here, we've figured out, okay, exactly the right amount of Roth conversions to fill up the 24% bracket. You can see, you go to the taxes, all the different kinds of taxes included here. So it's all there, including the IRMA, which you can see at the 2-year look back. We're still paying it even after those years are done. Let me go.
And that was a great addition, Justin, from you and the team, those various IRMA brackets, because it does become a point of contention for clients when we are talking about Roth conversions. And it is a pain point for them. No one wants to pay more for Medicare because they have greater income and they're going to get the exact same insurance. No one likes to pay those IRMA premiums. But to go ahead and show the net difference after the cost of paying additional IRMA premiums for a year or 2 years, whatever the length of those Roth conversions are, it was a very helpful feature. So I appreciate you for adding that.
Thank you. Yeah. And it is possible and often we actually see that, targeting an IRMA bracket, either, staying below IRMA entirely, that would tend to be more common for people who have a little less resources than this example household. But, it may be, okay, let's stay below IRMA bracket 2 or 3, right? Somewhere between the 22 and 24% bracket typically, that those often are good options. And by the way, and we've talked about this too, Jason, you'll often see that the differences between strategies are relatively minor. And given that these are estimates for, 20, 30 years, the reason for this kind of heat mapping was so that you as an advisor are not, or the client doesn't feel like, oh, there's one answer here, right? I mean, the difference between the 24 and 32% bracket here is basis points, right? That is not something that we're going to write home about. So it does give you some optionality to say, okay, well, what we seem to have here is evidence that Roth conversions can help you. Depending on how the future goes, and which one we choose, we kind of throttle how much advantage we get. But you definitely see a lot of good options where, if somebody is particularly sensitive to IRMA, or they just are reluctant to write a big, Roth conversion and tax check in some year, that's fine. So that's where we're trying to help you not sort of be painted into a corner on, there's one answer here. So let's see, we were running a little bit low on time, but I wanted to wrap up at least not the Q&A section here. You have mentioned before that this shift from probability of success, kind of, abstract statistics, to what can I spend? What are my guardrails? Tax savings have actually had an impact on your business in referrals and so on. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I guess to take a step back, my passion runs very deep when it comes to helping retirees and guiding retirees through their retirement. My father, so he retired June 15th of 2024, and he passed away on September 7th of 2024. And I know you that, and I want to share it with the group, because my dad, even though I was his wealth advisor and he had plenty of money, he actually could have retired 7 years earlier. But he had this scarcity mindset. And the scarcity mindset was deeply ingrained in him. And although all the financial planning tools demonstrated and showed to him he could be successful retiring at 65, he chose to continue to work. And it really does boil down to the fact that his parents were children of the Great Depression. So he witnessed them recycling tinfoil and saran wrap. I don't know if you can recycle saran wrap, but right, it goes that deep. He also was misguided by a financial advisor. It cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars off their retirement years. And so this was deeply ingrained in him that he was afraid to run out of money. And so since that occurred, I started the master's program at Creighton, psychology finance program, and obviously teamed up with Income Lab to really just deliver some incredible software. And these guardrails are tremendous in helping clients understand their resources and the income they're eligible for. And it does allow them to dream a little bit. And when you turn to Tax Lab, I do believe Tax Lab is the secret sauce. When you turn to Tax Lab and you look at this, tipping the government. So Justin, if you don't mind, I'll just give my phrasing. Can you go back to the green?
Yep.
Flip back to green. And so I just talk a little bit about the varying distribution strategies that a lot of advisors will utilize. I talk about varying tax strategies that may be beneficial to them, maybe not. And I just do a demonstration on, let's say, a Roth conversion. And I say, okay, well, it looks like one tax strategy we talked about, Roth conversions, could be effective for you and your family. It looks like it could save you approximately $629,000. And I say, but you know what? Saving is really not the way to frame that. And then I hit the flip switch and I turn it to red. And I say, based on the IRS tax code, the reality is, by not pursuing a Roth conversion, not pursuing some of these tax strategies, we're actually choosing to tip the government. Is that by design? And then typically the case is, well, no, I don't want to pay the government any more than I have to. And then I'll take it a step further and I'll say, so in the event you had an extra $629,000, how would that reshape you and your family's life? What would you do differently in your life if you had that money? And I'll have them paint the brushstroke by brushstroke of the family vacation that they didn't get to take when they were younger, that they wish they would have been able to, that now they're going to pursue. The trip to Europe, the anniversary, the 50th anniversary coming up with their wife or their husband. And really let them talk through how this money would shape their life. You could also take another approach. And instead of asking the prospect in front of you how $629,000 would shape their lives, you could ask how $629,000 would have reshaped their parents' lives. What would it allow their parents to do differently? And it takes the spotlight off of your prospect that's in front of you. And it truly does allow them to put themselves in their parents' shoes and start to think about maybe how their childhood would be different. So it's really, really powerful. Psychology is so important when it comes to our experiences as young children, how we witness our parents and our grandparents, and our beliefs about money are deep rooted from a very, very young age. And if we can talk with our prospects and talk with our clients about their early money memories, the very first memory they have of money, it will help you understand some of the roadblocks, some of the challenges, some of the fears they have around money. And once we understand that psychology, we then can help them overcome that hurdle, overcome that obstacle, so they can live the life that they deserve and truly live their wealth. And that's what I spend 95% of my day doing. And from a prospecting standpoint, I will say that the tax lab has been very helpful in quantifying the benefits of tax smart distribution strategy, not just talking in theory, but quantifying the impact, and then taking it a step further to asking the client, asking the prospect how that money would reshape their life.
I think that's a really, that's a powerful story. And I think, so I've heard so many of those, either of the sort you said, like, somebody worried to retire, putting it off, or I've heard examples of people who are retired and can't spend, and then they hit, 80, 85 and sort of think, oh man, I couldn't spend all this money if I tried. And so, yeah, between Tax Lab and Guardrails, this really, it hits on that goal of, what you're doing as a financial advisor. You're helping people live the best life they can, making great decisions that are about meaningful time spent, doing the best they can with the resources they have and the time they're given, which is really, I think, what everybody would like to do. I mean, that's a very meaningful thing to do for people. So thanks for sharing that, Jason.
Thank you.
I think, and actually, there was one question that does relate to that, which was, okay, can you use this to show someone they can retire sooner than they thought they could?
Yes,
Good answer.
absolutely. We actually had one scenario where through the Roth conversions, we were able to demonstrate the tax savings, and we were able to have a client retire 2 years earlier. So they chose to retire 2 years earlier because of some of the tax smart distribution strategies and the spending capacity they're eligible for.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good, like, in fact, we have another feature coming out, and this one is very soon. You'll see this probably in the next three weeks or so, that addresses exactly that. But look, how do you get what happens if you delay retirement and save more? You can spend a lot more. But if you retire at 90, are you going to be able to enjoy that spending, right? Or if you keep hard charging versus if you thinking about scaling back. So that is part of a conversation a lot of people are having, and you could certainly do that already with Income Lab, but we do have a feature coming out to literally help you have exactly that discussion. What's the range of times I could retire? What are the ranges of savings and so on, and kind of find the frontier of timing and savings that will hit their goals. And a lot of times, it's going to be good news because, Jason, I know you've said this a few times, but lots of other advisors say it too. With a lot of people who have saved well and have financial advisors, their challenge is going to be learning to spend and live their life. They have that saving muscle really well tuned, and that ability to spend, that permission to spend, is hard to come by.
Great note, Don.
Yep.
So true.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you so much to Jason Juhl for taking the time to share your experience and so on. Please do check out Jason's masterclass. Ashley put it in both the chat and the Q&A. Have a great week, everybody.
Appreciate it, Justin.
Take care.
Thanks all.